in the 1960s, if you got 100,000 miles out of an engine, everybody thought it was really a dynamite motor, you know. And let me get this back in.
Yeah, I always heard from Uncle they were shot at 100,000 miles.
That's exactly the way it used to be. And nowadays, like that, because they've made rings thinner and with less tension and all that, and they don't wear the block out, you can take an engine that's got lots and lots and lots of miles on it now, and you will not feel a ring ridge at the top of the cylinder. You just won't feel it. I mean, there's not one there. But on your old 302 and your 289, your 283, and all those old V6 or V8 engines that used to come out all those years ago, right there behind the water pump, if you dragged your fingernail up, it was going to snag on a ring ridge that was deep enough in some cases to where whenever you try to knock the pistons out, they wouldn't come out because the ring would get caught on it. And that's why you'd have to ream the ridge. Well, you don't have to ream the ridge. I don't remember the last time I had to ream the ridge. I never had it. But I've got a ridge reamer just so I can teach people how to do it. But we almost never have to use it anymore. And it's getting to where the ridge reamer is getting to where it's a thing of the past. Unless you're working on those old engines like from the 1950s and 60s and all that. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, the firing order on the old 352 engine from the 1950s, as I remember, was 15486-372. Don't get messed up on that. There's only two cylinders that are swapped in that firing order. From the later Ford firing order, the 15426-378, they swapped the 8 and the 2 around after about 1960. And that's something. All right, but anyway, I got smacked on one like that. I threw some plug wires on it. I just knew I knew what the firing order was. Hoop, hoop, boom, bow. And then whenever I did research, I found out, wow, this is not right. All right, so you got to, let's look over here, cylinder gasket leak diagnosis. Let's talk about that. Diagnosing symptoms that can be caused by a cylinder head seal leak. You got to make sure the cylinder head seal is the cause of the symptom. Sometimes you can't look at a cylinder head gasket and tell where it's leaking if you don't have a good sharp eye. You can have one that actually has blown a gasket and it's got water.
I don't know. Mike has a thing you get from Snap-on.
Yeah.
It's a chemical. You put in a tube and you put it in the cooling system. Mm-hmm. And it detects any combustion gases. Mm-hmm. It'll turn it a different color.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that.
It's been around a long time, and I've seen those things, and some mechanics swear by them, and some mechanics have never used one. I mean, we used to use them at a Ford place sometimes. If we had one that was a real tough one to find, and we were thinking it might help. But I tell you what happened one time. Typically, anytime you see this thing punching coolant out like a geyser out of the radiator, you're thinking, "Oh gosh, this thing's got a blown head gasket." Well,
that's not always true.
Exactly. Alan Cobbs called me one time when he was driving a 93 Camry, and this was back in about 2002 or 3. Mm-hmm. And he was out at Perry's store, and he says, my Toyota has overheated. Can you come out here and get me? And it's only like 5 minutes out there, Yeah. And so I jumped on, and I, had something, the guy's doing something here. So I was buzzed out there to get him on my pickup truck, and or whatever I was driving then. I can't remember. But anyway, I went out there to get him, and when I opened the hood, he had a long split across the top of his radiator. Mm-hmm. And whenever we poured some, I had some water with me, so I poured some water in it, while he was running. And man, it was just punching coolant out all over the place. It had been sitting there for 10, 15 minutes from between the time he called me and the time I got there. See what I'm saying? So it had plenty of time to cool off. Yeah. But as soon as he started it, it's punching coolant out everywhere. I was like, oh, this thing got a blown head gasket. And so anyway, he just jumped in the vehicle with me, and then he called a wrecker, and they brought it over here. And so I was going to show the students what a blown head gasket is like. This is a good training experience. We're going to have to pull the head off this thing and all that stuff. So I said, okay, guys, watch this. So I took the radiator cap off, and made sure it was full of water, and we fired it up, and it ran smooth, and it started flowing water in the radiator, and it kicked the fan off and on. I don't know where all that stuff went. Or why it didn't do that here in the shop. Well, see, if I'd have been really a knothead, then I would have grabbed the opportunity to throw a head gasket on it to begin with. Anyway.
Threw you for a loop.
Yeah, it did. All right. She knows I'm in class right now. She'll have to wait. All right. Now then, it keeps ringing. I'm going to answer it. Hello. Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. No. It wasn't that big of a deal. Okay. Now then, so oil and coolant can travel from the external leaks in the other locations to the cylinder head seal area. So you got to check all the potential leak sources. You remember I told you how those overhead cam engines have got an oil passage that goes through the cylinder head gasket, and it can leak oil there? Well, it can leak oil into the, usually to the outside. It won't usually go anywhere else. Some of them it can go into the coolant or whatever. Most
and it'll blow 4 quarts out like that.
Yeah, it sure will. And in the case of oil leaks, cam sensor seal, cylinder head cover gasket, and PCV connections, be an issue with that.
My buddy blew a motor up like that. The guy that at the shop, he walked across the shop holding the head gasket by the corner where it leaked out. And he put a bend in it. We were scared to do it, but we done it anyway.
Yeah.
And about 2 weeks later, he was driving and it spun every one of the rod bearings.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
What did it do, get water and oil?
No, it leaked all the oil out.
Oh, it leaked all the oil out?
It blew it out. There was oil all
Was it
over.
because of that gasket he held out there? Oh, brother.
So he held the gasket out there and it formed a little pinch in it.
Yeah, it bent, warped the gasket,
Yeah. Well, you think it ought to flatten it out, but you've already damaged it, When you're
Head
diagnosing...
gasket like this when you get it.
Yeah, when you're diagnosing symptoms that can be caused, well, you could hold it like this, but just not like that.
Yeah.
But when diagnosing symptoms that can cause a cylinder head seal leak, you got to make sure that the cylinder head is the cause of the symptom. Occasionally, you'll see people that'll just throw a cylinder head gasket on one because they know how to do that, but they don't know how to find out what the problem is.
Right.
And so, one of the things that Chelsea did whenever she put that oil cooler on that car, when we got the oil cooler off, what did we do? We checked the dadgum oil cooler to make sure that it was leaking. Right. We shot air pressure in it and we put bubbles, we sprayed it to make sure that it actually was leaking. Because we want to make sure that's what the deal is. When I'm pulling a head off of one that I feel like has got a blown head gasket, to begin with, I'm going to make doggone sure that I can find where the thing was leaking, if at all possible. Right. Now, you can usually see it, but you got to shine the light from every angle. You shine the light from the side so it makes shadows. You're going to see stuff you'll miss if you're looking straight on it. Got that? So what I mean is so make sure you shine the light from every direction. You'll see a place where it's cratered out. If the fire ring has failed, you can see that easy, right? But if it's traveled from the coolant passage into the combustion chamber, then you may not be able to spot that quite as easy as you think. Now, the interesting thing about the way head gaskets can blow, Brendan, is that they can put coolant into the water, into the cylinder, or they can put compression into or they can blow between two cylinders. Right? So there's all this other stuff. Always, what else I told you too? And I told her this when she's putting that bolts back in there. Make darn sure that you blow every cylinder head bolt hole out and don't have no fluid in the bottom of it, water, oil, or nothing. Because when it hits that fluid, it's going to stop turning before it gets completely tight. And it may be, I've actually seen it begin to shear the threads on an aluminum block. It starts to shear them. And then later, whenever the thing comes back leaking oil, because that happens to be close to where the oil passage going to the camshaft is, and you screw the head bolts out and you wind up there's threads on the head bolt because the pressure caused it to push it on out. Now you've got a stripped head bolt hole, on a really nice late model car. And you don't want to have to pay $5,000-$6,000 for an engine. You got to fix that hole. They actually, believe it or not, Helicoil actually makes special helicoils just for head bolt holes. I don't know if you knew that or not. They make helicoils, but they make them just for head bolt holes, right?
Yep. It wouldn't make too hard to hook her up.
Huh?
It wouldn't make too hard to hook her up.
Well,
It's kind of hard to hook a cylinder head.
well, no, not the head, but the aluminum block, like on a Toyota Camry or something. That block's aluminum, and you can mess that thing up really bad. All right. So, anyway, in the case of oil leaks, you got to make sure that items like the cam sensor seal, cylinder head cover gasket, which would be your valve cover gasket. Remember the one we put on without gaskets earlier, Brendan? That one, okay. Okay, so, all right. Brendan, are you awake today? You got some coffee there? Bless his heart, he had to work late last night. Chin up. You're tougher than that. You're young. You're young, and you got job security. Okay.
I mean, really, you can't go all night and stay up all the next day too.
I used to do that. When I was your age, I would do that hauling hay.
That's the word.
I would haul hay for 12 hours, and then I would stay up all night, and I would haul hay for another 12 hours. Now, after a while, granted, that will catch up with you.
Yes, it will.
Yeah. In cases that are difficult to figure out, though, you might need to use dye. that's sensitive to ultraviolet light so that you can pinpoint the source of a leak. And we've done that in here. We put dye in there. We see where the oil's leaking or where the coolant's going in there. Now, Donnie had one in a Jeep Cherokee that was getting oil in one of the cylinders, and he actually put dye in it in the cooling system. And when he pulled the valve cover off, the dye showed up in there, and he could see that he had a crack in his cylinder head. You see, so that's pretty handy stuff to do there. That dye will show up. And you can also look in there with a borescope that's got, the purple snout on it and see if you got, if it's going down in the cylinder. Okay, Group 9, there you go in your service manual. If you're using, some of the Chrysler service manual will tell you that. Well, in some cases, when a warm engine emits large amounts of steam, and I wanted to take a picture the other day. I was riding behind a car that was pumping out so much steam.
And that's how Cadillac come in the shop yesterday.
Yeah, well, and he was just buzzing down the road. The engine was good and hot, and it was still making steam. Just lots and lots and lots of steam coming out of there. But anyway, you're going to make a gallon of water for every gallon of gas you burn. So when the engine's cold, you're going to see water coming out of it. What used to be alarming on some of the new trucks is the stuff they used to make the pipes had a tendency to be kind of green, and whenever you crank it up, some of that stuff would wash out with that water, and you see green water coming out of the pipe. And everybody, oh no, antifreeze, scare you to death. One day, here's a good one. One day we got through doing the cylinder head on a Toyota Camry, and these guys were really diligent about plugging everything back in and all that. There's a whole bunch of steam coming out the back of the thing when we got through, and I said, oh my gosh, what did we do wrong? I mean, it just kept on steaming and kept on steaming. And then I noticed that whenever the water was dripping on the pavement back there, it had a kind of a pleasant smell to it, and it was blue. And I found out that they took the windshield washer hose and plugged it into the intake. So they were sucking windshield washer fluid, and it was going through the engine. We had to check. Well, I mean, that was an easy mistake to make. Hey, this is another vacuum hose we need to put somewhere. Let's go here. That's what you got to pay attention to. That's a true story. It happened in this stall right out here. Okay.
Did it make it run awful though?
Well, it was. It actually. It may have ran a little better. I don't know.
Was the methanol stuff?
Well, no, it was that pretty blue $1 a gallon stuff that you buy up there at the store. You may need to pressurize the cooling system to check its integrity. Now, a lot of the times on these engines, like these diesels, that like the Power Strokes and all that, every single one of them comes with a block heater. The block heater is like what we got in that silly little neon that came from up north somewhere. It's a wall plug hanging out of the grill. You plug it into an extension cord. It's got a heating element like we have in a water heater, and it heats the block. Now, if you've ever got one of those in your hand, don't plug the darn thing in so you can watch what it'll do, because it'll bust it. It'll ruin it. If it's not in water, it's like a water heater element. It'll bust it. Like if your water heater goes dry, it busts the element. You see, they're not made to be heated up without having to have the water around them. And you got to have pressure on them too. But anyway, the point is, this thing, if a lot of times we'll heat the doggone engine up really, really warm with this block heater, and then we'll start checking for our leaks, just because sometimes whenever it expands a little bit, you're going to leak a little bit more. You might need to use a chemical chest, which is what you were talking about, to check for exhaust gases in the coolant. See, that's been around forever. I mean, for years and years and years that's been there. And you got to determine based on the symptoms in the test exactly what, if anything, is leaking and where it's leaking to. Now, you saw what we did on this silly little Mitsubishi, this 94 Mitsubishi out here. Take the radiator cap off, spin it over, so it'll spit water all over the place out the radiator cap. Right? It makes a bad mess. So I took the front plugs out, and when I spun it over, it didn't do that. But we ran it a while, and we kept adding water and all that kind of stuff with some of this stuff that we were going to try to seal it with. And eventually it got to where no matter what plug you put in it, it was going to push water. I took the plugs in the back out, which are hard to get to. And any plug you put in it, it pushes water. So every cylinder, every damn cylinder has maybe cracked or whatever. And that car is probably a $50 car, and you could spend, you could put a $1,000 engine in it, and you'd have a $60 car. A lot of people don't realize that. You know what I'm saying? It's just really, it's an old car and all that, and it's not worth fixing. Now, if she wants us to spend $200 or $300 putting head gaskets, would be the least. It'd be at the very least, it'd cost $250 to fix that car even without any labor. Right, at the very least, that's the least. And at the most, it would cost a heck of a lot more, because you pull it off, you find out the heads are warped or cracked or something like that, That thing got hot because I think it busted the lower radiator hose. It's interesting when one comes to you and it's got a brand spanking new hose on it, and it appears to have a blown head gasket. See what I mean? Yep. I saw a Toyota out here one day, and the hose got so hard and it blew so hard that this much of the hose was missing. But you couldn't even pull the hose together. It just exploded out of there, and it was gone. It was that much of it missing. It was just really.
That had some pressure on it.
And it was really a hard old hose too. All right. Once you have established the location of the leak, you got to disassemble the engine components and look to confirm the cause. So that the leak between coolant and oil passages, or between those in the combustion chamber, are not necessarily proof the cylinder head seal's at fault. A crack in the cylinder head or in the block is also possible. There was a guy that had a 98 Chevy pickup, a black one, and he'd been all around town, and this was before Michael was over here. And everybody, in one of them CSFI fuel injection systems, it's got the spider injectors underneath the valve cover. And these stories are important, so that's why I'm taking time to tell them to you. I'll forget them if I don't. You see what I'm saying? And I have to, share with you what little bit of knowledge that I have, so that you can get a little something out of sitting through these class sessions and all that. Is anybody in here bored? Are you bored? Brandon, are you bored? He's trying to be honest. You see, he's just not saying anything. Okay, now then, what we're going to do. This guy went all over town. He had a misfire on cylinder number 4 on that 350. And he went to this shop and this one and that one and this one and that one and that one, and everybody said, you need an injector, you need a fuel spider, you need this, that, and the other. And he just says, can y'all have a look at this to see what y'all see? And so the first thing that my man did, and he was a guy named Shannon from over in and I'm not throwing on elbow, and he pulled all the plugs out, and one of them was just as rusty as it could be. I mean, it had big flakes of rust on it. And so when we pulled the head off on that side, between the intake valve and that, it had a crack right there next to the intake valve and the head, and there was water getting in that cylinder. So we had to get a cylinder head pop on it, and he was good to go after that. But anyway, that was. But I see that one had to have a cylinder head. But you can actually, the spark plug will tell you the tail a lot of the time, and that's what you got to. You remember what I told you before? You got one that you park it, you let it sit a while. When you switch it off hot, then you crank it back up, and it's going boop, 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 like that, and then it cleans up its act. You switch it off while it's still skipping and jerk the plugs out. Then you see how they look. You don't wait till it quits skipping and pull them out, because they're probably going to look normal. Or skipping, yeah. It's really something funny how the least little thing amuses them. And okay, now then, what we got right here? Hey, bro, how you doing? Are you a pretty good boy most of the time? I just wondered about that. Okay.
That's for the white beer stuff.
Okay, yeah, that's cool thing. Okay, trying to make sure I know which one I assigned here. All right, we got that one here. Yay! Okay, yeah, here's one of those. All right. There's 3 of those. Okay. All right, there you go. Hey, give me the whole thing, not just that part right there. Okay. I gotta. Now, see, sometimes if we have past due stuff and I won't know about it, right? Because this doesn't reflect anything. Right. We need to know about it. All of them. I need the whole, even for the school and for me. All right, leave those on my desk in there if you don't mind, please. Thank you, sir. All right, now then. You're going to have to find out, too, why the cylinder head gasket failed. All right. You making your way through the test? Everything been okay? Okay, unless, or let's say, so pressurizing the coolant system is important to try to find it, and sometimes, like switch it off, you pull your plugs out and see if any of them are showing steam or something like that, or if they're showing soot, it's a fuel thing. All right. Now, once you reach the conclusion that the failure of the cylinder head is probable or possible cause of the cylinder, you got to disassemble and clean it so you can inspect it. I mean, you got to clean everything really good, and you don't want to create any new sealing problems by scratching and gouging it with some kind of a metal scraper that's going to dig into the aluminum. That's bad news. You know what I'm saying? You're actually supposed to use a plastic scraper on aluminum. And something else. If you get too aggressive with these little bristle discs on these little 3M bristle discs, you can mess up a cylinder head too. Matter of fact, Billy Pilcher out there, in Enterprise, he said one of the worst things he sees is where people have took the heads off and they've cleaned them with these. They use, like if you use the green one when you're supposed to use the white one, or even if you use the white one too much on aluminum, you'll take some of the aluminum out and it won't seal. And then you got to resurface it and all that kind of stuff. So be really careful when you're cleaning these things. You don't want to scratch a big gouge in it and cause issues. Even that silly little crack, the gasket, see, big issue there, big problem. care of the cylinder head removal starts with unbolting the head. You got to, you're supposed to do this, and most people don't think about it. Use the reverse on these aluminum ones. Use the reverse of the tightening sequence. That's how you do that. On some intake manifolds on V6 aluminum block engines, if you take the manifold loose and you don't detorque it in the right order, you'll actually warp the intake manifold and you can't get it off of there.
You can't get it off.
It won't come off. If it's, you're always trying to get it off and it's bound up because you got it warped up. So if you're doing that, a lot of times the temptation is to get your air ratchet and just at random go like that. But on some, pay attention. It'll tell you if it's important that you detorque it in the same step. Don't wing it. Okay, if you wing it, you get in trouble. How many of you guys in here have ever got in trouble by winging it? Just winging it, you get in trouble. They're just flying there and trying to fix something without looking it up in the book, right? Yeah. You never got in trouble by just winging it?
I never tried. I just always look it up.
Oh, he always looks it up, so he's never winged it. Okay. Okay. I figured you was a real wing wagon on it. Okay. All right. When they're stuck to the block, don't damage the sealing surface by prying on them, and pay attention that some cylinder heads use littler fasteners in areas that may not be obvious. Here's an example. On the cylinder head, see this cylinder head bolt right here? This cylinder head bolt right here is a stud. No, it's not. It's actually a bolt, but it's a big one, and it covers long, and it came off of a 5.3 Chevrolet engine, right? Mm-hmm. And they got a couple of different lengths of these, but along the bottom of that 5.3 head, there's a bunch of little 8mm bolts. And people will take these big ones out, and they'll think that's all there is to it, and they start prying them off there, pop, and then broke the cylinder head. So don't go there, okay? All right, now then, let's see here. So make sure you get that. There's actually, like on that 4.7 liter engine that you guys worked on, if you were pulling the cylinder head off, there's a couple of little bitty bolts that's right in front of the timing chain. And a lot of people, when you won't see those, you can destroy a cylinder head in short order by not taking all the bolts out. If it feels like all the bolts are not out of it, they're probably not. That's when you need to go back and look real careful and make sure. You need to double check everything so that way you don't cost somebody some money. Now, when you're doing it on one of my trainer cars, it gets me a little bothered whenever somebody breaks something like that. But if it's the guy that's the president of Jones County Bank or whatever that's got his Lincoln in there and you done busted his cylinder head, that's not a pretty situation. Okay, after you've don't lay your cylinder head and they were talking aluminum now. Don't lay your cylinder head on its sealing surface. Don't put it on the bench with the sealing surface down. You see what I'm saying? Now you can damage the aluminum cylinder head if the bench top is metal. So if the head does have baked on gasket material, you're going to need to use cleaning procedures that are won't damage the cylinder surface. So you don't supposed to use metal tools. I've already talked about that, and so on and so forth. Just clean it up real good. Make sure that, and you can use a white bristle disc, but don't. But you got to use it. You got to be really careful when you're using that. The white 3M Rolock bristle disc is the one that's okay to use on aluminum, but don't overdo it. Really important. You got to spin at the right speed and all that kind of thing. So, always use compressed air to blow foreign material out of the bolt holes, and that's in any kind of foreign material. Okay. Now then, you can actually check head bolts for stretch with a straight edge. You ever done that before?
Nope.
Now, if they're torque to yield bolts, you're going to have to reuse them anyway, right?
Reuse them.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm saying is replace them, not reuse. I said the wrong word. Excuse me. Okay. How many of you guys know how to measure a cylinder head to see if it's warped? I should have shown you that when you had the heads off that.
Pretty easy.
Yeah, you get
straight edge and feeler gauge.
Straight edge of the feeler gauge and lay it this way, that way, and the other. See if the feeler gauge will go under it. If it will go under it, you need to find out how much of a feeler gauge will go under it. You start with the thinnest one and you work your way up, and you'll find out how much warpage that thing's got. Look at your warpage specs in your book. If it has to be resurfaced or replaced, if it's beyond service, you're going to have to replace the cylinder head. And you can get rebuilt cylinder heads from the parts house. Now, sometimes, I don't know if you do this or not, on some of these engines, when you machine the cylinder head, you've actually got to get a shim to put between the cylinder head and the block to make it sure that the spacing is the same.
It'll be a higher compression.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how that works. Though you shave a cylinder head too much, you got to put that shim in between there. And of course, now my dad took 125 thousandths off some Volkswagen Bug cylinder heads one time on purpose, because me and him were horsing around. and boy, would that thing ever fly. But it started pulling the studs out of the block. Eventually, but it was a possible hunting car. It didn't matter. All right. Some gaskets got to be coated with, aerosol gasket sealant. You got to make sure you look in your book and see what it is that they want you to use.
Copper spray though?
Yeah, there was a Chrysler Technical Service Bulletin on their engines, TSB 090598, that had talked about a Mopar aerosol gasket sealant, which was similar to something like copper coat or whatever. And when you put a new gasket on there, don't position it wrong. Make sure if it says up and front and anything like that, you look at all your holes. You remember what I told you before? Make sure that the holes in the new gasket are like the holes in the old gasket and they're not bigger or something, because we got to make sure. And you don't want to if you put the gasket on there backwards and you block an oil passage to your cylinder head, you can destroy the cam bearings and all that too, and a lot more on one of them aluminum. It's interesting to me how those camshafts will spin in those little saddles, without bearings. They don't put bearings in there; they let them spin in there like a rod on a connected rod on a Bridges Stratton lawnmower. All right, so now then, bolts that some bolts have got a dacromet coating. If they got a dacromet coating on them, the Viper bolts, the bolts they use in a Viper. I know you rebuilt a bunch of Vipers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, that's got a you don't oil those, but if you put a little bit of engine oil on the lightly oil the bolt threads, but not enough so it'll drip down to the bottom of the hole, you're going to basically give you a more true torque reading. I knew this one guy down there is built these hot rod engines, and he would never ever use anything except Allen head bolts, because he said he got a truer torque reading than he would with because of the diameter of the head bolt. Okay, you put them in their proper position. Some of them may be shorter than others. Make sure you don't put some in there that's too long or too short. And they need to be able to pretty much screw all the way down with your fingers. You can tell if they're right. And and make sure you know that there's some of the smaller bolts and all that. And then you do them in stages, Okay, now then, after you're working on it, make sure what is something that you should replace on just about any car that you put what are we going to check? Let's say that we blew a gasket and we don't really know why. We put it back together and we know that our job was done right, but do we know that it's not going to blow another gasket? How are we supposed to make sure that it won't blow another gasket? As sure as we can make sure. We're going to put a thermostat in it, right? Let's put a thermostat in it. Let's do that on my fault. Brandon's already turned into a skeleton. He's about to croak. Okay. And we're also going to make sure that the doggone cooling fan works. And I've shown you guys how to do that. Make doggone sure the cooling fan works. And sometimes, like what I like to do is take my little potentiometer that will lie to it about the temperature of the vehicle. I just look at where the thing goes, and you can use your scan tool and you can dial it up to where you want the temperature to be. Crank the car up, plug that in, dial the coolant up to where the fan's supposed to come on. See if it'll come on. Just see if it'll come on. After you know it'll come on, you watch it come on and go off 4 times. You know how we do the Russian roulette test where you put the roulette test where you put the light in series with the fan and you turn the fan through and see if the light ever goes out. If it ever goes out, that can destroy. Imagine this. You've done everything right. You wiped all the fingerprints off the fenders and the steering wheel. There was nothing anywhere any wrong. And the one thing that you missed, even though that fan kicked on and off 4 or 5 times, is you didn't do a check on that fan, and it's got a dark spot on it. And it stops on the dark spot when they're sitting in traffic, and it blows another gasket because you didn't check the fan. You see what I'm saying? That's why it blew the gasket before. Okay? All right, then. Make sure you got the bleeder screws. If it's got bleeder screws, do the bleed. If it's got a bleeding process, make sure. I've told, filling the engine up with coolant is not like pouring water in a bucket. I've seen people in here, and I ain't watching them real close, they'll just pour the water in there until it's up at the top of the radiator, and they think they're done. They'll put the cap on it and go to town. The next thing you know, they're overheating, and they take it out. One guy took his own off after I told him this repeatedly. He took his own cap off when it started overheating after he didn't fill it up right, and it sprayed water all over him. He got burns, and he had to come with bandages for a while. But anyway, the coolant level is going to drop as trapped air works its way out of the cooling system. That's just the way it is. Okay, now then, it's time for us to blow through these here answers to these questions. Make sure. Did you guys get them? Did you guys get the answers to the questions?
No,
I got a few. I think they were kind of random.
Right.
You got a few of them that you don't think they're right? Well, that's disgusting.
That's all it is.
All right.
Let's see.
Question number 1. Let's look at that one. It won't take us a second to do this, then we'll be through. Right? MLS gaskets use a what?
See,
That is actually A. Graphite facing on a steel core. Yeah. Well, they have to for aluminum because as it gets bigger and littler, it's got to scrub back and forth, right?
oh, I know you said earlier that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said earlier they got thin
Yeah.
What?
rubber coating between